My name is Mark. I'm a deaf person, age 60. The election of Joe Biden comes as though he is shouldering the white man's burden and asks us after the terrible mistake of electing Donald Trump. His goal was to escape any sort of burden. To shoulder that burden and welcome its being shouldered, or else. My goal in this talk video is to cover a wide range of subjects that pertain to this or else that we get from Biden. You see, we live in the midst of a catastrophe everyone knows, but nobody really wants to talk about it. I'm very disappointed in my peers, the honors department of 2 schools, the newspaper establishment, with whom I have discussed at length my findings as a medical library clerk in the mid-80s, that special details could not be possibly missed showing that AIDS was a government operation. People don't want to talk about it. And one of the reasons they don't want to talk about it, and never did, was that, like the monstrosity that now tutors the United States of Germany, I'm thinking United States of America, I'm thinking of Nazi Germany, was the idea that if you tried to help the Jews, you would be treated like one of them. And this was very effective in deterring help for the Jews. One of the lessons that was drummed into my head when I grew up in a Jewish Holocaust survivor community was that you couldn't say anything to anyone. Jews came into New York talking about the concentration camps. Nobody would listen. Nobody listened to me when I talked and published at school about what was happening. And from the look of it, very, very few people follow up with my talk videos concerned that what's happening now shows that I was right all along. COVID is a monstrous population control bomb. It is also part of the litany of anti-abortion terrorism acts. And yet it's being treated like another issue that we must only evade, that we must never talk about. And it's useless to try to talk about it. Back in the 80s, when the script that no one dares mention from Biden's Pennsylvania, Biden began in Scranton, the hardcore of the type of pro-Reagan Democrat that sort of evolved out of George Wallace. He moved to Delaware. Delaware is the land where the secret baseball mud is. You might not know this story, but every baseball was rubbed in a secret play location of Delaware mud. And of course, the DuPonts were down in Delaware, notorious aristocrats of the Clucker variety. And I had a pair of DuPont boots called Woodstock boots, and within 2 days of wearing them, they cut deeply into my ankle. They were completely unwearable. So, industrial naughtiness is not unknown to Biden. You may have noticed when he bombed Syria just a few days ago, there was an echo in the press. He said it was a defensive action, and in came the checks and balances saying it was a defensive action. We've seen this echo in media before when Mondale was running against Reagan. Reagan would do his demagogue routine, and Mondale would say, "We need a commander-in-chief who could command." At the medical library, one of my co-workers, a woman, said, "Oh, but he's so tall." And this was the idea that Mondale was providing an echo for what we wanted from Reagan. Tim Kaine depicted himself as the ultimate Reagan man. Before killing Circe, Masons from Pennsylvania announced that Reagan didn't know. The betrayal in the 1980s of myself, who was James Crary at the Pitt News at the time, by Louis Lapham of Harper's Magazine is truly historic. At that time, when these Delaware River secret mud documents by Gail Burstyn were found, it was obvious I had been singled out as the child of a humanist. But he decided to side with the now legendary John Schulman in a major heist and the forgery of a personality through the use of an impacted neuroplasm, which they implanted in my facial nerve when holding me hostage as a crying child they now call a sissy. And Pittsburgh is after my arse, they say. Well, they're after the arse of anybody who sides with me. My coach, Richard Rome, fell dead, while blazing police lights were everywhere, according to his surviving girlfriend. Most mysterious. Circe Kennedy was killed to stab me in the heart. The girl who taught me sign language in defiance of the secret mud union was attacked and raped. My best and sometimes only friend. If this talk seems a little ponderous to you, I ask you to consider the wide range of issues that I go into and ask yourself, how could they be made more articulate? How could they be made better organized? You see, the world is in disarray sometimes. If I have to get up to go to the tinkle shop, I'm going to leave it on because I know that any reader who comes, and you can be a reader, usually CC gives a fair auto translation at the bottom of the screen for closed captions, looks for a convenient place to jump off. I'd like to avoid giving you a chance to cut short an encounter with a dissent towards Joe Biden. There are many issues at stake, but one of the most important of them is that Joe Biden was quiet, maybe even a string puller, while working with Barack Obama, at the White House as his vice president. The loyalty of the military is very important, both to Biden and to the German mentality. And we have these fraternities who we know have been stalking me terribly with BDSM. They poisoned me in the mouth, they've chemically castrated me, they've given me diabetes, they deafened me, and they have no absolute impunity. I'm given no representation by the press, I'm given no lawyer. It's as if by magic they have been given a stylized Sieg Heil through an odious phantom claim on jurisdiction leveled by the seeming death of John Lennon in support of the people who wrote the secret baseball mud documents by Gail Burstyn found in Biden's Pennsylvania, which he has had no problem promoting by silence. He appeals to the silent majority. What that means is the people who don't want anything but to be left alone won't say anything. He's running a protectionist racket. That horrible club-wielding cyclops Donald Trump will be brought back if you don't go along with his protectionist racket. Americans so want to be protected. So they've made it out that telling the truth about him is certain death. One of the things that they did to build support was to criminalize my childhood Biden's notorious gesture of sniffing a little girl's hair was meant as a divining sign about the secret mud um, starlet of the Neva script by Gail Burst and Dee Dee. And they said that this inclination to engage in being trapped in premarital sex in Clem's shack, Clem Baker, which is related to the history of Studebakers, just so that you can get the idea of how deep the divining signs are, because I'm going to go into some of the divining signs. And shows that queerbait wanted to use inhalants. It's incredibly far-fetched. Nobody who knows anything about me or could see the medical evidence of the slaughtering head blows, as a doctor in Chinatown did, only to be punished by others in Chinatown with the murder of one of his namesakes for his scientific documentation of torture, would realize that Jimmy was being dragged around in fear by overbearing adult armed brutal offenders forcing me to do things against my will. I had nowhere to run, and the school never reported my absence, even though I went to them crying that I was going to be killed, long before I was attacked, brain injured, and then seduced by their starlet. The shadow of Bobby Jindal also hangs over the entire staff of the loyalty to the military that is at work. There was a pause because the computer glitched, but it's running again, thankfully. There were people who were loyal to an old roommate of mine who was the director of Afghan operations for Obama. When I was at Temple University, he was in my room. And they seemed to have staked out for Trump the murder of the Kennedys, along with some people working with Peter Gabriel and the Warhol group, manipulated by Amanda Harcourt, and the notorious Ripper murders in Seattle, who staked out a claim for Yoko Ono and things like this talk video. Well, I'd like to ask this director of Army Operations, I'll leave his name out for once because he tends to use it as a justification, that I dare to name him. What would you replace? You say that I'm a symbol of dishonor. What would you replace the honor system that I emerged from with? Is it this terrible seduction group that you think is so holy? My grandfather worked at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He worked at the Wichita Herald. He knew people like Rush Limbaugh all his life. They voted him and my grandmother distinguished citizens of Poplar Bluff, Missouri, a man of the Ozarks. What, sir, would you replace an honor code like that with? Yeah, I don't see how I can miss the point. You want to change America into Nazi Germany. And that's your idea of the honor code that's at work. So it means nothing to you to be participating or empowering the murder of Kennedys. You see it as a University of Pittsburgh frat boy lesson. So what we see in all of this is deep meditation by people like Joe Biden, who scrambled my anti-apartheid articles with indications like Mount Beatty instead of Mr. Beatty, of their intent to lure to Mount Desert Island for the second Holocaust survivor experiment I was used with. I was gassed as a child. I was used and then on Mount Desert Island, then restationed for COVID here, where the notorious South Vietnamese generals are still operational with their hostilities. America, in that way, is Joe Biden's Dust Boat. He describes the mandatory sucking sensation when feeling loss, and someday there will be joy, maybe even a festival, he says. We're dealing with manslaughter across the board. In divining signs, they've used Andrew C. for Cuomo and AC because AC is American culture. State ways can't change folk ways. Jackson is often said to have been the perpetrator of smallpox blankets to the Indians. Actually, it was a British general. But they built this arc and Zork, I call it, because they put a lot of grannies out, you know. And then you get the white man's burden or else. You know, this is going to level the playing field, an equity site for the black man. They did the same thing during apartheid. The Mount Beatty article was to say, well, we're going to sacrifice the liberal white. And the NAACP was very gung-ho about it. They didn't even pretend not to be. And honor among these Nazis means criminalizing my childhood. And if you go down, it's ironic that his name is Joe because, you know, you have Joe DiMaggio is one of the people who was being avenged by the Kennedy assassination because of all of the cackling about some party pictures with JFK and Marilyn Monroe. And Maggio and Migliozzi, Dominic Migliozzi used to take me to the Babyland corner where Shaky worked. He would say, I'm going to split your head wide open to people. And with a bag full of Kennedy $50 in the back of the Post-Gazette truck. And the Babyland was the scene of a murder mystery. So Maglio, Bagliozzi, all of these things in there. And Joe DiMaggio and Donald Trump both got Ellis Island awards. So Biden is a real Jekyll and Hyde character in a lot of ways. And he's like the priest of Caesar Trumpulus. So, Red College turned down knowledge. The professor there, Brian Duchin, who teaches American history, offered a course in the 60s. It would have been possible to see the continuity in the events that led to this age of cardboard immigrants being put in the bleachers of the Seattle Mariners to show our solidarity with the children in cages or whatever they're doing. You know, there's a pursuit of the good life in America still, despite the atrocity. And of course, back in Pittsburgh, they call the aging communities gentrifying nightmares. They call in Seattle at the VA the COVID bomb, the zombie apocalypse. You know, Andrew C. AC/DC plays out as one of the Mad Hatter's divining signs, but you also have Jill B. Kane in Pittsburgh. You know, and the Kane is very important to the whole process of a widespread manslaughter case. That's what we're dealing with this CIA backyard situation in Pittsburgh and Seattle. So, Clinton was always one of the greaseballs for this operation, sniffing a little girl's hair as a divining sign about how they've depicted Jim McQueebate. Well, if you look at the Kennedy assassination, you'll see that there was a man whose veins popped out like Casper. He was real macho, being alluded to a star of The Mechanic, Charles Bronson, and a Japanese dude with Jack Ruby, who clearly was a diplomat for the Neva Confederacy, who promoted Midori for Obama as a stabilizing factor of virtue and Nazi honor during the AIDS attack that was no longer mysteriously promoted by Hare, because Hare was uploaded as a defamatory idea of the dishonor of the left after killing the Kennedys and the Kings. And that's what they were doing. Here was always CIA. As a child, I had a single mother and a very fair heart. Tranquility would sometimes shine from my pretty emerald eyes, and I would identify the good from the pages of Ramparts magazine, left around the college when I was walking around it. Times adrift, but starry eyes having been won by the Times and the Aquarians. I still enjoy ecology. Peter Max in those days was an important person and still holds a place in the permanent legacy of style, of interest in light of how fashion becomes old, while some lingers, thinking by example of Art Deco. Energy that defined the proving ground of the generation just ahead of me. I had seen her at the Nixon Theater in downtown Pittsburgh, down the alley from the Ash Wednesday Trinity Church where Derricky is still around, a loper and a mope, like Obama's director of Afghan operations, a mope. Pittsburgh at the age of 8 over the objection of Mayor Flaherty, who sought to close it down, at least for children. So you have this idea that their art was somehow productive to the anti-war movement built into the energy of the times. But what they were really doing was creating a lesson of a dishonorable honor code. And they wanted people to drop out because then Biden could get them through the draft board. So, evasion was the symbol in Dealey Plaza. That's why they like to promote, Neva Confederacy liked to promote the wiggle. Because, Takai and John Wayne were working together on this project of making everybody alive only by their utility to cinema. And of course, they opened the Green Berets with the men singing in German. Oh, that's not mysterious, I suppose. It's a very sick movie, the Green Berets. I have no idea if the Green Berets were actually as sick as that movie is. But Takahi and Stockwell put a C in the Star of David. When I say they did it, I mean they understand what that means. The C stands for copyright, you will be killed like a Jew. And that's what Inslee's doing with his BDSM in Seattle for trying to get to the bottom of this stuff. And Biden, of course, is loyal to the cause of salvation. The VA has the computers all staked out. When I look at women who look pretty from a form of lovemaking I never had the opportunity to engage in. I was always very shy and coy as a lover. I brought goosebumps to the girl who they sent in to prove that virginity, a prior virgin, was rapeless or something. It's a ridiculous mentality that Joe Biden is the idiot behind it. He would put an innocent girl in the bed of a man he was trying to prove was a rapist. He's an idiot. There's nobody in their right mind would take that to court because I'd be as rich as Donald Trump, and the predators putting the C in the Star of David would be out of luck. And you better believe in their web of the occult. They would start killing more Iowa Mollies. They would be really out there about it. And he's allowing them to start because Queen Elizabeth is behind the Tories' tacit claim on America through this presumed disappearance of John Lennon. How to disrupt the society was what John Stockwell, who was following me around, was all about. Because then, once you've disrupted the society, put chewing gum in the typewriters and put Jimmy Queerbait's glasses and peanut butter and all the things that they do, you can demand cooperation and complicity and compliance in return for protection, which is Biden's game. So what you have in this situation is that the fundamental chain of command, and I know I'm going to risk the temper of the psychopaths at co-read college, but I really have to agree with the sad about the law of the jungle remark. Outcasting is at root of civilized society, not just gun enforcement. That's why we have these George Floyd problems. It's because the police don't understand that when they apprehend a criminal who is recognized as a criminal, society as a whole, even liberal society, agree with them. They think they have to engage in judge and jury in their head stuff the way Peter Gabriel does. So, we have this Jekyll and Hyde problem because the root of international law is outcasting. Joe Biden risks America being outcast by the international community. And of course, we can stand up to the international community with our protection racket and our, hatred of love and so forth. But it will still dog us that we were the pariahs. And the degree to which cinema is a foreign attack can be very clearly seen in the way that Oliver Stone worked with Putin, for example, after glorifying the murder of JFK. So we have a number of problems that I think are quite clear in the churchliness of Biden, which in some ways sees Adolf Hitler as a form of salvation. And he derives this insane comedy cover story from Mount Desert Island from the betrayal of Louis Lapham and the endorsement of BDSM by Clint Eastwood. So they have these fraternities of certain death running scorecards over this death row about a trumped up abortion, for example. And Greg Carl made no secret that they were doing it to burn the children free of the devil's grasp. I mean, so when you see things like YIKC in Pittsburgh, you need to think about what they're driving at, despite the fact that it's largely useless to try to talk to anybody about these things. Probably the way that I was being targeted, despite Fido mopes, as I'll call them, claim that it's a dishonor symbol, is that there were secret conditions to the unconditional surrender of World War II. They got rid of FDR and bypassed Henry Wallace for a true man while running a newspaper article, Dewey Defeats True Man, which was a pun that Truman believed he had defeated the real man they had taken to Argentina. So the secret conditions for unconditional surrender involved, such things as an agreement in Pennsylvania to zero rollout. My mother's in her 90s and still doesn't have a vaccine. The zero investigation. And it's not that they're incompetent. If you go to the bioethics edu of Pitt, you'll see that they have done more work, exhaustive work on the equity side. Their bioethics about the distribution of what they refuse to rule out is endless. They put tons and tons and tons of work. And they think and think and think and think about their justifications for their double crosses. And they get this cheap shot to Joe, who launches a raid on recovery by attacking somebody who has a childhood head trauma because he thinks it's macho. And the really horrible thing is that the musicians put music and poison into the works, because I guess they knew that there were violinists hired to meet what they were calling the merchandise at Dachau. And it's all sort of like a real scientific shot in the mouth from these people who are engaged in terrible perfidy, and Biden refuses to investigate. And he's just an echo for it, really, running a protection argument. And the bottom of this is the rotten argument of the Warren Commission that people aren't ready to hear it. Trumpy-Toon was saying that we wouldn't survive the truth about America's involvement in the slave trade. Well, this is the rotten argument of the Warren Commission again. Trumpy-Toon and Biden should be reevaluated in light of what has really happened.